So I said, okay, all right. So if we're talking about parasuicide, what are the statistics that are out there? So I started looking up the statistics for 2023 dating back to like 2020 because we know in 2022 it was the highest percentage of unaliving yourself that happened, and since they've started like really recording these things. And I said, okay, then let's try to figure out what does that mean. And then in 2023 the number got higher, and it was more than 50,000 Americans died by suicide in 2023. That was more than any recorded record. But I also want people to understand that when we're talking about suicide, that was direct and very definitive evidence and research to prove that it was a suicide. When we talk about parasuicides, that means that that person could have been drinking, that person could have been on drugs, that person could have had diabetes and decided to stop taking that medicine, that person could have had cancer and decided they no longer wanted treatment and they were just going to let nature take its course. Because sometimes suicide isn't just, you know, a gunshot or hanging, or sometimes it's literally not taking care of yourself because you're tired, you're done, or that's not what you wish to do. So I said, okay, you know, what other stats are out there? Almost 45% of high school students experience persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness during the pandemic, and 20% of them considered suicide, as the CDC reported. That was for 2022. But let's talk about this. What communities did they survey? There are a lot of marginalized communities that will not give you any of this information. They're not going to talk to you about it, either because they're afraid that they're going to be labeled or because they don't talk about it in their families or households. A lot of the times you have this stigma surrounding who they are, and they feel like they're going to, you know, embarrass their family lineage or their community, maybe their job. They're trying to make sure they don't get fired, because people do lose their job when they talk about mental health, because you have this almost visceral reaction to somebody talking about mental health. You have this like air of contagiousness that's like how somebody who has depression is going to touch you, and all of a sudden now you're sad and you're depressed, and that's not how mental health works. But ignorance is bliss, and if you by now haven't decided that you want to learn about it, hey, more power to you. When we also talk about mental health, I want us to remember that we have so many different conflicting beliefs and stories depending on culture, the intersection where you are. It could be your nationality, it could be your race, it could be the culture, it could be your community, it could be your church, it could be the people that you hang around, your friend group, it can be your family, it could just be a spouse. You have all of these things that play into what you think about yourself, right? And suicidal behavior, like, it reaches further than what we think, because not only do you have to think about the person unaliving themselves, but now we have to really look at the long-term effects of somebody who is going through this particular situation, right? This particular illness, this affliction that's happening with them. You know, they're much more likely to self-harm and be hospitalized and have hospitalization like more than 3 times, because the first time doesn't always happen, and we don't always know how many times a person has done something. Because the thing about depression that I've learned is that it is very secretive. It is very sneaky. Depression dresses nice. Depression has on the most expensive shoes. Depression has, the best dress. Depression has the best goatee ever. It has the best car. Depression has the flyest house. Depression has the most friends. Depression has the most pictures on Instagram. Depression is out out living life, out partying, out succeeding so many motherfuckers that it doesn't look like depression. It looks like success. But behind that facade, behind the smoke and mirrors that we create, is this sadness, this cloak of insecurity, this cloak of misunderstanding, this cloak of guilt and shame, this cloak of feeling like you aren't good enough, this cloak of feeling like you could be better, this cloak of I'm letting people down, this cloak of what am I supposed to do in my life, this cloak of why am I not making more money, why don't I have the best cars, why can't somebody love me, why can't I love myself? And that all turns into another set of statistics. People who suffer from suicidal ideology usually have an average about 3 hospital visits for self-harm, about 8 emergency room visits related to suicide attempts and or self-harm. They have about 38 self-reported suicide attempts throughout the years. 38. Because not everybody, remember, we're talking about when we go back to parasuicide, it's the attempt at suicide, it's attempt at self-harm without the meaning of death, without the expectation of dying. But you can do something to yourself where you can wind up paralyzed, you could wind up in a coma, you could wind up altering the trajectory of your life. And I just was like, sometimes, again, I want to really reiterate that the person who is suicidal, a person who's depressed, a person who is struggling with mental health issues does not always look the way you want them to look in your head. They don't always appear the way you want them to look.